But I want to talk today about missions. And I took a public speaking class. My office required us to take some before we make some presentations. And one of the things that they talked about was that you're supposed to first establish your credentials as somebody who has authority on some topic. And so I thought I'd try to do that by telling you guys about my first mission experience of going overseas, which was to Oxford, England, where I went to help all the international students that flock there every summer to learn about English as a second language. And I was going to volunteer at this cafe that just did conversational English with them, and a lot of them didn't know Jesus, and so we do like Jesus skits and stuff and talk to them. And first day there was great. I was pumped up, really, on God high, let's go. And caught the eye of this Belgian girl that was also volunteering there. And from that point on, that mission trip just went downhill, and ended up spending most of the mission trip when I wasn't at the cafe, sneaking off to some park to be with her. And we did, made out a lot in Oxford, England, basically. That was my first missions exposure. Yeah. Missions was something that I was always really excited about, but it was kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing for me. Growing up in church, I went to, it was kind of close to a Baptist church, and so there's an emphasis on missions, and a lot of times the missionaries from places like the Philippines or Pakistan would come home, and they would talk about what was happening in the world, what God was doing, not in America, in other places in the world. And it went something like, if I was to bring some of them in here tonight, just kind of telegraph that in, they would probably say things like, if you look out at the buffet there, all the food that we're going to waste on that buffet could go to feed the trust home for like 2 weeks. Or they would say, the money that we blew this weekend on stuff we didn't really need, and you could probably support a native pastor for like a month on that. Or they would say, just because you got here in a car tonight, you're in the upper 5% of the world. And the American church, God has blessed it so much and given it so much stuff that it's just gotten fat and lazy and really doesn't have much of an impact even in the world or even in the places in Lynchburg where we are. And I can look and see in your face, there's a little bits of truth in there, and it brings out an intense feeling, and it always did in me, of guilt. Of guilt for where God chose to put me in the U.S. And also feeling that God was doing these amazing things in other parts of the world, but not here where I was. And for a little while, you kind of take that and you're like, yeah, I'm going to change, and I'm going to change the way I live, and I'm going to do stuff, and I'm going to get into missions. I'm going to go on mission trips to places like Oxford, and get excited about it. But the motivation was guilt, and so it never lasted. And so eventually, for me, it got to the point where it was either I can deal with this constant flux back and forth of excitement and guilt and live with those feelings, or I can just kind of check out and become a little bit indifferent and say, okay, God, I know you're doing some amazing stuff over in the world. I don't fully understand why I don't feel like it's happening here, but I'm going to compartmentalize it. I'm going to say, that's what you're doing over there, and I can write a check to some Kids for Compassion. I can write a check to a friend of mine who is doing mission stuff over in China. And then I can focus on doing Engage and Blue Ridge here. And I can make the two things separate. And what God is doing over there in that part of the world doesn't really affect me. Doesn't really affect my walk with God. And honestly, I was there for a long time. The last couple months, 6 months, God has really started to change that. Because He started to show me that His plan is for what's happening on the other side of the world to have an impact on what my spiritual journey here looks like, to have an impact on my life, my relationship with Him. And that's the kind of filter that as we go, Blue Ridge, next 5 weeks, or I guess 4 weeks now, we're going to be doing Mission Sundays. And if I'm honest, Mission Sundays for me used to be a time when I would skip church. the first time Doma came here, my wife and I skipped church because we were like, Mission Sunday's not for me. And it sucks. I had to go get the video and watch it because, mistake. But that was where I was. And honestly, I think we're all somewhere in that spectrum of you hear, hey, Mission Sunday's coming up, and so it's like, hey, I'm ready for a guilt trip. I know at some point Blue Ridge is going to get around to asking me for some money. Eventually, at some point, just hearing these amazing stories of what God is going to do in the world is going to make me feel bad about Lynchburg. Because I don't feel like God is doing such amazing things here. To maybe one step up on the spectrum. Maybe just kind of feel indifferent. Like, hey, I'm going to get excited because I'm going to hear about what God's doing in Nepal and in, we heard about Nicaragua yesterday, and in Ethiopia, and in India with GFA. And that's going to be really exciting because it's cool that God is doing those things on the other side of the world. And that's great, and maybe I can write a check to help out with that. And maybe some non-specific prayers, even. Maybe write a couple letters or whatever, but I don't really think it's going to have an impact on how I live my life. I don't really think it's going to impact every day how I have my relationship with God. Or maybe another step up on the spectrum, which is, you've seen missions. We all have different church missions backgrounds. And so it's kind of like this Blue Ridge Church does missions a little bit different. Maybe a little bit weird. There's maybe a little curiosity. Maybe want to check it out. Maybe, excited to see what God is doing. It seems like, this is kind of a new thing at Blue Ridge. I haven't really had a huge emphasis on missions before. And then I would say on the other end of the spectrum, fully away from the guild, is you're excited about it. It's like, hey, it's Mission Sunday. We're going to hear about what God is going to do in the world, and not just as kind of a spiritual high, the kind of indifferent spiritual high, and then go off and then it fades. But really, I'm expecting that God is going to have an impact through these missions things, hearing about missions, on what's happening in my life, and my spiritual journey. I would put myself now in that last category because I'm excited about this. 6 months ago, when Woody asked me to go to Nepal, I was in the indifferent category. If I'm really honest, the thing that scared me most about going and saying yes to go on that trip was the fact that I'd go, I'd see some really cool stuff that God was doing, and it wouldn't impact my life here. It wouldn't impact my spiritual journey. It would just be me being an observer. Maybe being able to contribute something there, but really just being an observer. And that was where I was at. But part of that trip, we got to spend a lot of time with some of the young adults. They're adults, 18, 20-year-old men who've grown up at the trust home, walking back to these remote villages with them and talking to them. And what started to flip with me is as those relationships started to grow, I realized that those guys were a lot like me. I realized they had the same struggles, a lot of the same questions that I had. And when I say the same struggles, they struggled with stuff like internet porn. They struggled with girls. Over there it's much more conservative culture and arranged marriages, but they still notice girls. They're 18-year-old young men. The hormones are still there. As they started to move away from the trust home a little bit, one of the big issues over there is gambling and drinking. Gambling is legal at casinos and stuff, and alcohol is cheap. And then the questions they had. A lot of the same questions I had of, they grew up in essentially a Christian home. And so as they're growing up, 16, 18 years old, they're saying, this faith that I've heard, that I've grown up with for most of my life, is this my faith, or is this, Mama Doma's faith? And they're having to make that same leap of embracing it. And then when they do embrace it, how we talk about these guys as going and sending them as missionaries to Tibet. That would probably be how I would describe it. For them, the question is, this is my family. These are my friends. These are my relatives. And they're living in these villages, and they don't know Jesus. And just like me, I can identify that with I have family members. My mom, doesn't have the right picture of Jesus. They're identifying with that, and they're saying, my parents, they don't know Jesus. And so God, I've embraced you, I've accepted you. So what does it look like for me to go and represent you there? And they grew up in Pokhara at the Trust Home, which, if we traveled there, we would say it's a step down material possession-wise. You go to these villages, and it's a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different ballgame from material possessions, and just frankly from a spiritual perspective. Just like if you guys have family, and it's like you go home and tell them, hey, I just became a Christ follower, and that's tough to do with your parents. I did that. For these kids, it's a whole different level. And they're struggling with, okay, God, what does this look like for me to go tell my family about Jesus? These struggles, these questions, God showed me we're a lot the same. If I took my buddy Lobsong and I brought him over from Nepal and I sat him down at one of these tables, asking the same questions that we ask each other, where are you at with God? What are you struggling with? What's God doing in your life? He'd fit right in. And in the midst of that, God started to show me this principle, that He has chosen them to be in Nepal for a reason, for a mission. And He's chosen me to be in Lynchburg for a mission. And those missions are the same thing. We have the same purpose. That's when we talk about partnering with people. It's because we have the same purpose with them. And so I want to put some scripture behind that, of what that is, to develop it. I'm looking at 2 Corinthians. And it says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he's a new creation. The old is gone, the new is come. And all this is from God, who reconciled us to Himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That's what we've been talking about the last 4 weeks. Reconciliation just means taking two things that are apart, bringing them back together. Two things that are broken apart and bringing them back together. And that was God reconciling the world to Himself in Christ, not counting men's sins against them. And He's committed to us. He's given us this message of reconciliation, of bringing things back together, what's broken back together. And we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making His appeal through us. An ambassador, before the days of the internet and teleconferencing and telephone and ready communication with every part of the world, when we sent an ambassador to a foreign country, all that foreign country knew about our country was what they saw in the ambassador. They saw the way he lived, saw what he talked about, they saw the way that he treated his wife and his kids, other people, and they said that's what that country is all about. And God is saying to us, I want you, where you are, where I've chosen you to be, to represent me there, to be my ambassadors there. I look at Doma. God chose her to be in Nepal to represent Him there. I look in Nicaragua at Oscar and Vilma. God chose them to be born and to grow up with all the stuff that they went through in Nicaragua. And then He saved them and said, represent me here, where you are. And then He said to us the same thing. He said, I put you guys in Lynchburg. I want you to represent me here. He's saying the same thing. He's giving us the same mission, the same purpose that He's given them. And so this divide, this compartmentalization that I've had of what God's doing in the other parts of the world, in India or Ethiopia or Nicaragua, and what He's doing here in my life, what God showed me was that He gave us the same mission, and He wants us to do it together. And that's the cool part. He doesn't just want, Doma to do her thing in Nepal, and the GFA guys to do their thing in India, and Lul and the guys in Ethiopia to do their thing in Africa. He wants us to do it together. And so there's some things that naturally start to flow out of that. The giving thing. If we've got this mission that we're supposed to do together, why shouldn't I help my buddy out? Just like tonight. We're here to eat together, to spend time to move towards God together. And part of that is this fellowship of, breaking bread, eating, it means a lot to us. So if you can't afford it tonight, somebody else is going to pitch in and help out. why shouldn't we? That's just the natural thing that we just makes sense, right? I'm going to help you out. I'm going to pitch in $10 to help you with the buffet. Because we have a common purpose and a common mission. The same thing globally. God has given us the same mission. And then praying with each other. I know in my life, if I don't have you guys praying for me, when I'm struggling with something, if I can't call up a buddy and say, hey, I need help, that's what community is all about, praying for each other. When we're struggling with stuff or excited about stuff or whatever, it just makes sense that that's what we do together. And so if we've got the same mission, the same purpose, then we pray for each other. And we develop relationships with each other. So we can write letters or maybe even travel over to one of these places and develop these relationships so we know what they struggle with and we can pray with them, for them about it. And they know what we struggle with and they can pray for us about it. I think one of the coolest parts of this talk for me was the fact Friday night I was struggling with this. I was trying to synthesize and get ready and nervous. And so I Skyped my friend Anand in Nepal, and I just told him what I was going to talk about. And I said, I'm nervous about this. And I woke up on Saturday morning, and he Skyped me back and said, I encourage you this, brother. And he kind of broke in English, but this is very encourageable. We'll be praying for you. This is something that we're doing together. And then it comes down to the application part of it. The giving and the prayer, that seems natural. But then there's this response of, okay, God, you put me here in Lynchburg. You put them there in Ethiopia or Nicaragua. And I've seen Oscar. We looked at Oscar and of just saying yesterday, and he said, God, how do I represent you in the slums of Nicaragua where you put me? And so the natural response for us then is, at least I think the natural response should be, okay, God, you put us in Lynchburg. How do we represent you here? And to be honest, that's the part that I really struggle with. Because I look at somebody like Doma, and honestly, if God said, I want you to go storm the gates of hell and you get 3 people to go with you, Doma's on my short list. I see her faith, and I see the vision that God has given her, and it seems like it's so clear, and it's so amazing what she's doing, taking these 85 kids who've never heard about Jesus and just raising them up and all this stuff, and I look at my life and I'm just like, man, I'm just muddling through. There are days when I'm feeling like, God, what do I even do with this? Stuff's thrown at me. The guys that I'm running with, they're stumbling, I'm stumbling. I'm having a hard time representing you at work. I'm having a hard time representing you with my family. I'm having a hard time representing you, for some of you guys with your kids. We're muddling through this thing. But that's why I think we're blessed to have relationships. Why these Mission Sundays are cool, because yesterday, we got to hear Oscar and the journey God took him on, from this guy who was a druggie, physically abusive towards his family, to God saving him, to God starting to say, hey, there's this place over here in these brothels that I want you to do ministry, and him going 100 miles an hour the other way. Saying, no, God, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do that. And finally saying, okay, God, I will. And then as he starts out to do it, he starts out with some other men around him, brothers, and they're doing it together. And one by one, they fall away. He said one of the guys started sleeping with prostitutes. Can you imagine that? And then God, again, providing his wife to go with him, and then to see what God is doing with him now. And so for me, it starts to become like a mirror of saying, okay, if it's really true, if God really chose me to be in Lynchburg and chose them to be in Ethiopia or India or Nepal and chose us to represent him where we are, then what do I do with that? Where do I start? And that's what I want to do tonight, is I want to start that thought process. Because I think God's going to refine it as we hear these mission stories, as we think about it over the next few weeks. That question, is going to keep getting deeper, and I hope God keeps challenging us with it. Of, okay, what's my response? the stuff that's happening in other parts of the world, how does that impact my walk here? How do I apply it? C.S. Lewis talks about it, if we aim for heaven, God will throw in earth. If we aim for earth, we lose both. And so I'd love tonight to be able to talk about, Duke's inner city ministry that has 500 new believers and in 10 years, and 10 soup kitchens operating in a sustainable model, or whatever else it is that that God's going to do 10 years down the road, but we don't know what it is. And so we got to look at what's the first step. That's what I want to talk about tonight, and I believe the first step is right where we're at. Because it's something that we taught to the Trust Home kids, and the last trip we went over there, every devotion we did, we hammered on this point that you have been chosen to be where you are, and God has given you gifts. And for them, those are gifts, the fact that they have relationships with Tibetan people, their families. Nobody else in the world has. Tibetan culture, totally unevangelized. They have relationships, and they speak the language, and they know the culture. And saying, okay, this is the gift that God has given you. He has chosen you. He's given you these gifts. So how do you use it? And it's kind of what you might call an asset inventory. We're going to say, what assets has God given me? Things that I get excited about. Whether that's outdoors, canoeing, kayaking, fixing cars, things that I'm passionate about, skills, talents that God has given me. Whatever it is, cooking, hanging out with friends, making movies, whatever it is, the things that we love to do. And saying, okay, what has God blessed me with? The gifts He's given me right here, starting with where I'm at. And then saying, what are the relationships I have? Specifically, the relationships with people who don't know God. And then saying, where do those things intersect? And what would it look like for me to say, these assets, these gifts God has given me, and the people that I know, how do those things come together so that I can represent God with the things He given me, things that God has created, these natural passions in me. And guys, I shouldn't say it, but there's some things that are natural passions that we have that are messed up. Not that. But the good, the positive things that God is doing in me and giving me a love for, and how do I represent Him in those things? Specifically the people who don't know Him. I want to take that as that's our first step tonight. And I trust that God's going to keep refining that and changing that as we go along. But tonight, it's easy. So those are the two questions that we're going to hit tonight. One of the ways that this has hit home for me, this idea of just what do you like to do, inviting people into it, that was how I became a Christ follower. I was hanging around a guy, Will, who liked to park cars at Blue Ridge, and so he invited me to come park cars with him. And then I met up with some guys who like to go out on the river and like to go hiking in the mountains, and that's something that I like to do. And they invited me to go along with them. And at that point, I like a lot of us, I thought knew where I was with Christ, but I didn't really. And I started to see in these guys something that was different. Something that I didn't have. It wasn't something that they said, except for Stephen Dunn, who didn't really think I was a Christ follower. Most of them did. And as I started to see their lives, started to see how they represented God in just what they did, in just the things that they had a passion for, that stirred questions in me. And that stirred things inside me to the point where I came to the point where I realized that I didn't have a relationship with God. God, that was something God did, but He did it through a bunch of guys saying, this is what we like to do. You come along with us, and we're just going to do it, and we're going to represent who we are, which is Christ followers. So as we take these steps, as we go through missions, these missions, as we look at all these things that God is doing all over the world, I hope that we can really start to take a look at our lives and say, okay, God, You're doing this over here. This is people representing You on the other side of the world, and this is me representing You here, and we have the same mission. What does it look like? How does this affect my walk with You? How does this affect my everyday? How does this affect how I live my life? So that's a question that we need to ask. And I'm excited because we get to ask it. the next couple weeks. So, Woody, you want to pray and close us up?